everyone, welcome back to What's Next with Lacey, the podcast where I interview young professionals about their career journey so far. It's January 2025. I cannot believe it's 2025, but here we are. I always like the start to the new year. I think that there is so much hope and energy surrounding the new year. Everyone gives January so much shade because it's cold and dark. And, well, I guess that depends on where you live. But where I am, it's cold and it's dark and everyone is grumpy in January. But I think it's a great time. I think it is a time where people still feel productive. They still have so much energy as we're going into the new year, and so much hope for what this year will bring. So I hope you guys are enjoying your January, because I certainly am. And I'm definitely excited for all that is to come with What's Next this year. I have so much up my sleeve. I have so much planned for What's Next this year, and I'm excited to get the ball rolling. On that note, I want to introduce you guys to the first guest of 2025. This week, I had the opportunity to chat with the marvelous Nick Castner. Nick works in podcasting. He has had all the various experiences in the field, but right now he is working in helping podcasts with marketing and monetizing their podcast. That is an incredibly important aspect of podcasting that honestly not many people think about. They think of the product, they think of the production, they think of the host, but a lot of work goes into marketing the podcast and monetizing the podcast and getting people to actually listen to the product that you have created. Trust me, it is harder than it looks. So I am really excited to dig in with him and chat about this work and his experience in the field. He has had such an interesting career so far. He has worked with incredible companies and incredible podcasts. He's worked with Condé, Nast and Atomic Entertainment and so much more. He details it all in this episode, so I don't want to spoil too much. He truly knows his stuff, so much so that I officially dubbed him the podcast genie, because I absolutely have the power to do that. I am the face of the podcasting industry, as we all know. Anyway, I am so excited for you guys to take a listen. So here's my conversation with Nick. I hope you enjoy. Nick, welcome to What's Next. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh my gosh, Lacey, thank you so much for having me. I am so much looking forward to this conversation. And all of our conversations before this were over email, and I did not know I didn't pick up your British accent until like minutes ago. So I'm looking forward to this just for the beautiful British accent.
Oh, why,
yes.
Thank you. I know, I will say I do surprise a lot of people with my accent. It is, I'm hoping, a pleasant surprise, but anytime I meet someone new, they're like, oh, where did that come from? So it's kind of my fun little party trick that I have up my sleeve without any work on my end. I am so excited to talk to you, to dive into your story. From my research, the title I feel like I've come up with for your work is like podcast aficionado, master, genie. Is that how you would describe your work?
Yes, generally, master seems like a big word. Genie, I've never gotten that before. But yeah. So my work today is well, my entire career has been around podcasting, and my work today centers around monetizing and marketing podcasts. So helping shows either make money or grow their audiences.
So what does that even mean? How are you helping them? What are you spending your day doing to help the people, the podcasts that you are working with?
Yes, so that varies greatly depending on the project, the show, the client. Kind of taking both parts and looking at them separate. For marketing, the best way to get someone to listen to your own podcast is to reach people who are already listening to podcasts. There's I believe the stat is now half of Americans have listened to a podcast within the last 30 days, but there's still plenty of people out there who don't listen to podcasts at all. Take my mom is one of them that I've sent her multiple podcasts, and she loves me to death, but she does not listen to any of the podcasts I send her. So with podcast marketing, we look at tactics tailored to people already listening to podcasts. And the vast majority of those boil down to collaborating with other shows, whether that be booking the host to appear on other podcasts, which is actually how we first were connected. You can also collaborate with other shows by trading ad impressions. So yeah, like going to a similar show in a similar niche and say, hey, if you promote my show, I'll promote your show. You can do feed drops or crossover episodes. That can be another effective way to introduce your content to new audiences. There is some traditional PR in that mix, and what's interesting there is I've worked on shows that have had fairly major PR hits, whether that be Vogue, the Hollywood Reporter, People Magazine, and those don't always impact downloads. They can contribute value to your show, such as if your show is centered around if it is an interview format, those PR hits are valuable in booking bigger and better guests, but not always an impact on downloads. And
interesting.
Yeah, and then the last big thing I mentioned is also pitching your show to Apple and Spotify. On both apps, there is a homepage, as I'm sure everyone listening has probably clicked on podcasts that are editorially curated on the homepage of Apple and Spotify. And I have some relationships to the editors at both platforms, so getting the shows I work on featured there. And then when it comes to helping podcasts make money, the vast majority of podcast revenue is generated through ad sales. So once an audience is of the size where it warrants a partner selling ads on behalf of the podcast, helping the creator or business owner navigate those partnerships, connecting them to new people, all of that. And then of course there are a handful of other ways podcasts make money, whether that be merch, subscription, but the vast majority of that money being made is on ad revenue.
So you are spending most of your day really kind of in the emails, doing meetings, that kind of thing, versus you're not really involved in the production side of the podcast that you're working with, or are you?
I am involved in the production almost zero. There are times when I am. Well, first off, again, depending on the show, I'm involved in the production of the ads, which I don't think is quite as sexy as making the show itself, and the vast majority of the time, a lot less complicated. Yes. And then there's times, for example, I work with Atomic Entertainment. They are an educational entertainment production company, and we have a show about the Oscars called The Oscars, What Were They Thinking? And it's co-hosted by Bruce Valanche, who wrote the Oscars for 25 years. And we were talking about audience development, especially we're approaching the Oscars, depending when this comes out. We're sort of in the middle of Oscar season. So my big push was like just the amount of people who are going to Spotify and searching Oscars in the search bar is going to spike greatly over the next few weeks. So all of these big tentpole moments, if you will, around the Oscars, the first being when the nominations are announced, and then also when the Oscars happen, we should create reactionary episodes to those live events. So the nominations come out this upcoming Thursday. So I've helped coordinate the team, and it's one of those like when you say the idea, you sort of have to like bring it to life. So I was like, oh, you guys should record reaction episodes for audience development purposes, also because it's just good engaging content and you're inserting yourself into the conversation. But so because I brought that to life, I do now have to like coordinate the guest schedules for the studio, and I'm actually the one to publish. So once the editor's done, they're going to send me the file, and I'll post it on our feed to make it live on Spotify and Apple. So I would say there's one-off circumstances when I'm involved in the production of the show, but generally I'm more behind the scenes, email meetings, that kind of stuff.
And you are doing this for yourself. You work on a contract basis. You own your own business. So what's that like? How are you finding these clients? How are you advertising yourself to get these clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. The short answer is it's almost all professional networking and going to events and asking people for intros and just showing up. I also It's one area that I think I could improve upon. And I think that my area for improvement in 2025, excuse me,
I know,
is
scary.
Yeah, I know. Is LinkedIn posting. Like, I made a LinkedIn post 2 weeks ago, and it was the first time I had in like 6 months. And like, I was just looking at the metrics and the amount of DMs I got and like the engagement just from one post. I was like, I should maybe do this like once a week and not once every 6 months. Yeah. So like the new client business it's currently all networking, which has worked quite well, as a matter of fact. But I think and social media, I think, can really compound those effects as well, or complement that work. Yeah.
Why are you doing this yourself and not for a bigger, more established company?
Yes. So I was on a year-long contract at Condé Nast that ended in November. So that's like, very much legacy media company that owns brands like Vogue, The New Yorker, Vanity Fair, GQ. It was a wonderful experience. Loved my time there. I actually learned a lot about myself, and it was kind of a transformative job, and I haven't had many of those. But so I would say I'm open to working at a place like that full time, and was very much open to working there full time. But media is going through a weird time, to say the least. So part of it's just been necessity of I find more part-time contract work than full-time positions are available. And I also I've been working in media and entertainment. I've been laid off a bunch. And I find that doing contract work, if you are laid off from a job, your income doesn't go to zero. You kind of diversify your risk by having multiple gigs. So that that brings me to continuing working contract gigs. And even if I were to find a full-time job, I am far more interested in full-time jobs that allow me to do some contract work on the side. Just again, if that full-time job would ever go away, I still have that freelancing business that I can more easily spin back up if something goes haywire.
That is so smart, because you are absolutely right. The industry just is that type of industry where it isn't that secure. You may not know always that your job is going to be there the next day or next month or whatever. So indeed, having that kind of diverse portfolio is super smart to kind of be a safety net for yourself. So I really like that approach that you have. So talk me through a life cycle of a show. Are you ever coming on from the very beginning, or is it more of an established show and they want to bring you on to kind of push them over the edge to, maybe market into a new audience? What's the longest you've spent on a show? What's the shortest you've spent on a show?
So shortest I've been on a show, I limit all my contracts, especially when I'm hired to do marketing, to a minimum of 3 months, just because that really gives enough time to both ideate, align, and execute plans. So 3 months is always the shortest. And then as far as when I come in, it's all sorts of times. For example, a show I'm working on now is called Money for Couples with Ramit Sethi. And it's, so it's personal finance meets marriage counseling is the podcast. And the whole idea is couples have conversations about money all the time, but never out in public. It's always behind closed doors. So it's tough to know. And I've even found this within my own personal relationships that it's you really didn't have this behavior modeled to you. So this podcast is all about modeling positive financial conversations.
That's an excellent idea. I will be listening.
Yes. And it's also, it has as just a sliver of drama, where the husband says something to the wife that you can't believe type of thing.
Oh, I love
Yeah. It's fun. And he has a very established podcast and YouTube channel, newsletter. Ramit does. I'm the host of the show. And he came out with a book in January called Money for Couples. Same name as the podcast. And I was brought on to grow the podcast in tandem with the book launch.
Oh, cool.
Yes. So that, that contract was extended through February. So that's about a 4-month project. I've been brought on from production companies to launch shows, which can be fun, but that also presents its unique challenges. And the longest I've worked on the show, so that Atomic Entertainment, the same production company that does the Oscars, they do a handful of children's education podcasts. Their biggest one is called Who Smarted, and I was working on at their ad network that was selling ads for the show, and that's how I met them. And then I was laid off from that job, and that production company hired me almost right after. So I've been working on that show now for over 2 years. So that's the longest. Yeah.
Oh gosh, that's amazing. So it really does vary to such a big degree.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a specific type of project that you like working on, or type of service that you like providing the most, or are you kind of like, I like doing it all?
I would say my favorite projects are the ones that pay me on time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so not too...
Very fair enough.
Yeah.
Big important part of being a contract worker, freelance worker, is getting paid.
Both paid and paid on time. And unfortunately, those aren't always the same thing. Yeah, but I would say I like working with clients who really like allow me to like pitch ideas and just kind of like let me go. That can be fulfilling. I work with a lot of smaller independent production companies. And what's nice about that is you can add tremendous value with like one email, you know, when they're like, oh, well, we want to pitch to Spotify. It's like, oh, let me email my friend who works on the podcast team at Spotify. And I send off that one email. And if they get featured, you know, it can like drastically change their numbers. And like, I didn't actually have to do that much, but I added tremendous amount of value. And I find I can do that most with the kind of the smaller production teams. Yeah,
absolutely. That makes sense. Do you ever have a limit to how many projects you just have simple like capacity for?
Yes. So I definitely have. So when I was at Condé, I was working 40 hours a week at Condé Nast, but they allowed me to do some projects on the side. So that I would turn away a lot of projects then, or like say, hey, this isn't going to fit for me. Let me connect you with a friend. So I never want to take on a project if I don't think I can do a very good job at the project. So that's sort of the question I always ask myself of, do I have enough time to really give this my all?
Yeah. In a similar capacity, what is the biggest challenge of doing this work that you do?
So the biggest challenge is like there is some science and data and all of that, but there's also a lot of art, and at times it's tough to connect the two, or I guess tell a story around when the data isn't there. Like, how does this, like, is this a success? The art of it all is difficult, and then explaining and advocating for that. And podcasting, as I'm sure you know, being a creator yourself, it's a crowded space, and there's a lot of podcasts. So capturing that audience when you're hired to capture the audience is not always easy.
Where do you see the future of the work that you're doing and your company going?
So I think it'll obviously adapt in line with how podcasting changes. And this was a valuable piece of advice 2 years ago, but obviously the push to video in podcasting is tremendous. And Spotify announced at the end of 2024, they rolled out a bunch of video features so you can now watch podcasts in Spotify. So I think like that, the rise of video has redefined how consumers define podcasts. And, you know, at one point there were, and there still kind of is in the podcast industry, rigid definitions around what a podcast is. And if you ask listeners, though, they see people talking and call it a podcast, and they could be seeing people talk on TikTok or YouTube or however they're consuming media, and they're still using the word podcast. And those, that'll be one interesting, like, media is so fragmented and media consumption is so fragmented, but to see how podcasting, I guess, begins to bring together all of these different mediums will be something I'm watching closely over the next year.
I do find that switch to video so interesting. I feel like I am maybe one of the, I don't know if it's like originalist, but I think my podcasts are something that I'm solely listening to. And so often actually choose not to watch my content as well, because I'm like, then I'm watching a talk show versus listening to a podcast. So it's something I'm grappling with as well in my own podcast.
Absolutely.
Mostly also because I deal with a lot of anonymity with my guests. So that's something as well. But so yeah, it's definitely an interesting part of podcasting that, yeah, we'll be curious to see how that develops.
Yes. And there's also, well, two things on that. First, I like multitasking for podcasting, so I agree with your personal, like just personal behavior of like I listen to almost all my shows, even and a lot of them I know are on video, but I would prefer to just listen.
Exactly.
And then additionally, there's a lot of very good podcasts that in order to make them have a video product, you would have to make them like almost a documentary. You know, like I think like Rabbit Hole by the New York Times was a really good, just like internet investigative story, 9-part or 8-episode show that it does not need video. You know, like it's a powerful story without video, and this big push from all the tech platforms to include video. I am concerned that there will be less space for the high quality audio specific storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. And even fictional storytelling, that like audio fictional storytelling, then it's just a TV show. Like, then, like that just starts to kind of lose itself. So no, I completely agree with that. Thank you guys so much for listening so far. If you are enjoying this episode, which how could you not be, please spread the word of what's next. You can text, Insta DM, email, carrier pigeon, whatever method floats your boat. But please share the link to this episode, or any of my episodes for that matter, with anyone you think might be interested. I am trying to grow a business here, so any help would be much appreciated. You guys are the best. Enjoy the rest of the episode. I want to now turn to your journey to where you are now. Talk me through what first drew you to podcasting and to start in this space.
Yes. So my first job out of school, I currently live here in New York City, but I'm from Nebraska and graduated college in Nebraska. And first job leaving school was at an e-commerce startup. I was working at a subscription box company, and I was very involved. I really connected with like the startup space in Nebraska. You know, there's a bunch of events and all of that. So very connected in the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Nebraska. And then I met an editor for my local newspaper, the Lincoln Journal-Star. Shout out the Journal-Star. And he asked Alec, the editor asked if I wanted to co-host a podcast for the paper on entrepreneurship. And it was one of those opportunities that I said yes before he finished the question. At that time, I was a podcast listener and just thought this sounded cool. So I signed up to make 10 episodes with the paper. We ended up publishing that show independent of the paper and morphed it into an independent production company. That one show we made, that first show that I developed with the newspaper, we made about 125 episodes, and then we did have some ad revenue and sponsors booked on that podcast, but the vast majority of the money with that business was for production services. So like a local politician or country musician would hire me, and we would create media on their behalf. And I did that for about 2 years. And then there was a company that was growing their media presence called Hurrdat Media. They were in Omaha, and I was in Lincoln at the time. And they basically bought out my company, and I joined their team. And so they had made an acquisition about 6 months before they made mine. That really started their podcast journey, and I joined that team for about 2 years working in Omaha. And I knew I really liked media. I really liked podcasting. That network Hurrdat, at the time they were doing a lot of local news and sports and local sports, and they still are. That's probably the vast majority of their shows are geared local content. And I just realized that if I wanted to continue working in media, if I stayed in Nebraska, I would be working on local sports my entire career. So I wanted a change of scene and just more opportunity. So I was looking at either New York or Los Angeles. And I have a brother who lives here in the city. So New York just seemed like an easier place to segue to.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel New York is the eternal question for entertainment professionals is New York or LA. And I will always be biased towards New York.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it definitely is. There is such a space here to be successful in all sorts of different types of media. So it sounds like you really learnt on the job. You learnt about this industry on the job. How was that? Were you often like stressed, nervous?
So There are times, actually, a big reason that I steered away from production is I learned that like when you're producing something and say something breaks or like you even mentioned before this interview that there was you had some tech difficulties with this platform that we're recording on. And I really don't, it reminds me, I was a bartender and didn't really like bartending. And because I just remember like when I was already behind on drinks and like the little ticket machine that would say one more drink to make would just be going constantly in the background. And I was already like trying to catch up and it's just like so overwhelming. There's times when producing is like that, like things are out of your control and you really don't know what to do. But making that next decision and making the best thing possible with what you have is the art in producing. And I decided I didn't really like it. And I did study business in schools, like the kind of business side of things I just feel more comfortable and confident doing. But within that, there has been a lot of YouTubing and just, Googling or literally learning on the job. Getting feedback from people is helpful, of course. And then also, I guess, being comfortable in not knowing what to do. Like at the end of the day, no one really knows what they're doing. So there's a project I'm on right now where I am advising this podcast team as they're selling their podcast. They're selling it to a bigger company. And I have limited experience. Like I did that once with my own company in Nebraska. It was a much different scale and the stakes weren't as high as the one I'm in now. And there's been sometimes they like ask me a question and I'm like, I don't know. Yeah.
I'd love to help
that. So, and like in those cases, leaning into the not knowing, and first it's okay to say I don't know, and that actually can give the other person confidence if you say I don't know here, but I'll try to find the answer. That can actually be more that honesty can be more grounding or disarming than trying to make something up that is obviously made up.
Yeah, that's excellent advice just in general, but also specific to podcasting as well. I want to ask, why did you decide to sell your company when you did? Did you know at the time that it was kind of heading towards this like more local focus and you wanted to move? Like, what was that decision?
Yeah, I would say just consistency. And I go through this back and forth, for example, as a freelancer now, and then as more of an entrepreneur where I had a team, and that was more, that I felt like I was more building a business, which I was. And today, as I'm like while I am the owner of a small business that's an LLC, that's, all my work is ran through, I do kind of feel it is more, my aspiration is it being a solopreneur type of deal. So I think there's both two different mindsets with both experiences. But what's similar is there's a lot of flexibility. You're your own boss. I really like that. But when I'm in that world, there's times like it's tax season and there's a lot more paperwork to fill out when you're a small business owner. Health insurance is a headache and a half for the American listeners. Health insurance. Actually though, yes. And yeah, there's aspects of showing up to a job and just getting a paycheck every 2 weeks that are tempting when that's not the case. So I think that was the main thing that drew me to it, that they were like, hey, like all of your clients can turn into our clients. You can still have those relationships. You can work on different projects. Like they did actually sort of introduce me to a level of national scale. That company they do some like pop culture, gossipy TMZ type of content. They have a lot of shows with Bravo stars. So I was able to kind of work on a scaled up version of media that was also interesting at that time. So I would say, it was a combination of just like the steady job and then doing more as a team than I could do as, the business owner.
What would you say is the kind of greatest lesson you've learned? Now you've touched on a couple pieces of advice so far and we'll get more into advice, but I want to know, listening to your whole journey from, the startup to the acquisition to moving to New York, what's the greatest lesson you've learned?
I don't know. It's tough to pinpoint just one lesson. And I still feel like I'm learning lessons, like I'm, so I would say the curiosity if I had to do one. And I think that's what's so great actually about podcasting, and the reason I love podcasting is like it just shows you different elements of the world, and it's a way to explore your curiosity. And I find making podcasts is the same. I just get so curious, and like I work on that kids podcast, and I'm obsessed with how they communicate at times complex subjects to children. Like that, it can be a very delicate or tricky thing to do, and just their framing of it. And I'm constantly inspired by the valuable information they continue to give me about how to make that show to resonate with 4 to 10-year-olds. So yeah, I would say just it's allowed me to develop my own curiosity that I hope I continues throughout the rest of my life.
I so agree with that. I think that's I have such a similar like ethos with how I view careers and my podcast, of course, and that's kind of the main point of my podcast. But you're always learning in your career. There is always something to be learning, and that's what I always want out of a career. And I'm like, if I'm no longer learning, then what am I doing in this role? I should be doing something else to like be learning. So yeah, I so appreciate that sense of curiosity that you feel and that the podcasting industry has given you. And it's something that I love about podcasting as well. I now want to continue on some more advice, because you have had such an interesting career. If you were to advise someone who wants to take the first step on getting into podcasting, what would you tell them to do?
Yeah, I would say just go do it. You know, like you just like it can be so easy to get stuck in the planning phase, or like 6 months from now I'm into X, Y, and Z. So like if you want to work in podcasting, just go start working in podcasting. And if that looks like you want to be a podcast host, start hosting your podcast. And then from there, you're going to learn, you're going to improve, and you're going to get better. If you want to work in production or be a production assistant on a comedy podcast, start DMing your favorite comedians who have podcasts and say, I want to do this. And if you interview 10 of them, one may say yes, but you only need one person to say yes. And it's like you can plan ad nauseum, but if you never implement that plan, you're not going to get anywhere. You know, so like like planning is important, don't get me wrong, but it's far more important to start whatever the plan is, even if you don't really have a plan, starting someplace and then going from there is how the journey starts.
I am nodding so aggressively because I feel like that is advice that I still should take on, but definitely should have taken on when I started this podcast. I had this podcast idea maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Now probably 3 or 4 years ago. And it was like 2 years after I had the idea that I actually started the podcast, and I actually released my first episode, because indeed I got so stuck in the planning of it all and the idea that it had to be perfect. I had to be perfect in order to start, that I never actually just like started. And I one day did just like come to that realization on my own that I was like, I need to just press record. Mm-hmm. That's how this is going to work. So yeah, I feel like that is such excellent advice. It's because it's so needed.
Yes, and no one's first time doing anything is going to be their best. You know, like everyone gets better. And the example I always pull is like if you look at Joe Rogan's first podcast from like 2005, the video looks awful. It's literally like a webcam from 2005, and now he is the podcast god. So yeah, it just like even your favorite podcast started not very good. Like their first episode was bad.
Yeah, that's actually such a good idea to make you feel better about the work that you're doing, to go back to someone who does it well and see how they were when they were in your shoes. That's such a good idea. Yeah. I also want to ask a little bit off a tangent, but you started by hosting a podcast. Did you not want to continue hosting?
So at that time, I had made 125 episodes for that first podcast I hosted, and I was sort of burnt out from it. So that's how it like kind of just like petered out, that it didn't. Yeah, I just like was no longer inspired to make it. I also at that point started looking to move, and the show I was hosting at was very local focused. And quite frankly, I also kind of just ran out of people to interview, you know, just like cool entrepreneurs, artists, or athletes, or just local to Nebraska. And like to say like I didn't have any guests, that is an understatement, or like that's not true. I'm not trying to bash Nebraska by saying there's no interesting people, but my first 25 guests I found far more interesting than I got to a point when I was planning my next batch of guests, and I was like, this just doesn't seem exciting. And at that point I kind of started looking for opportunities on the East Coast in New York. And then once I got here, I'm still open to hosting things, and I think I have room for improvement before I consider myself a very good host. And there's like the comedic aspect of it that I don't think I'm great at. So like a goal I have for this year is I want to take an improv class, and mainly it's just that I love improv, and I think what you learn in improv can be so applicable to your daily life. And I also think it's like crucial. It's a crucial trait to be a good interviewer. So yeah, I'm not closing the door to hosting, but I haven't hosted in years, and this is my first podcast interview I have in years, like in a couple years. I just like I'm just like behind the mic, or like not on mic and behind the scenes, and not doing really anything like that. So I am open to it, but I'm kind of in a transitionary phase with it.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Though, by the way, for your first podcast interview in years, you are doing great. And so
my gosh, thank you.
Feel like maybe your own advice is applicable here in terms of being a podcast host, and that you won't be perfect, but you should start.
Thank you. Yes. The other thing that I guess I've really, and I think this relates to like, I guess, professional development is all, but I'm an overthinker and can get really in my head. And when I used to give media appearances, that was me to the T, and it would get in the way of being a good interviewee. So I think like as I've gotten older and just more sure of myself and more confident, that has worn off. And just I was recently listening to a podcast interview with Stephen Colbert.
Obsessed with him.
Love him. Yeah. It was on Mike Birbiglio's Working It Out.
Yeah.
And yes, Stephen Colbert's piece of advice that I took away with it was, he's like, Stephen Colbert, speaking of himself, says, I am the least authentic version of myself when I'm nervous. That just really hit home. And now I guess I am in a better position to not be nervous.
Yeah.
And that's something. I'm about to turn 30. I know, hold the applause, but the countdown's on. And with doing that, there's a lot of reflection. And I'm grateful to be turning 30, because I sure as hell don't want to be turning 20 again. I've enjoyed my 20s, but I don't want to be going back. I don't want to go back to when I was 19. And one reason is I'm just far more sure of who I am, more confident in who I am as a person than 10 years ago, and continuing to lean into that, develop that, to give good media appearances, hosting, all of that.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. I just turned 28, so I already think that my countdown to 30 is also on.
Yeah. I'm trying to frame it as a positive, though.
I love that for you.
Yeah.
I am hoping in the next 2 years I also start to frame it as a positive.
Okay.
I'm still very much in
Best of luck.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very much in the hold up, wait, no, I don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
But time, that's how it works. I also want to ask, you obviously have started your own company many times. So what advice would you have for doing that?
Yeah. The company advice is similar to like the podcast advice of like, it's far more important to start on it than anything else. Like I got a text from a friend recently that is looking to start a company and wanted to hash out the mission statement before doing anything, which like mission statements are important, and it's a good idea again to like have like what you do and like all of that ironed out. But it's also important to get your first client too. So like with that, it was like a services business, and I didn't say this, and I was more just like, this mission statement's good. It was my advice, but spend far less time on the mission statement from the get-go and far more time hustling to get that first deal or client or whatever.
Yeah. Because money's going to be the part that keeps it going versus the mission statement being correct.
Yes, exactly. And yes, the reason businesses close is lack of customers and not the perfect mission statement.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
What is one thing you wish you had known before embarking on your career journey?
Something I learned recently was I as I said, I worked at a big company last year for it was a 12-month contract, and that sort of gave me a sense to, like, I guess, let go of the things that you can't control, as opposed to, like, early on in my career I would get really, like, attached to what I was working on, and then when things didn't go as I had expected or planned for, I would get disappointed and get really, like, worked up about it. And now when you work at a large company like that, there's so much outside of your control, and you're only contributing, like, to a very much slice of the pie. And that just kind of taught me to, like, I guess, deal with the propensity of things that you cannot control in it. So that would be one. But also, like, my first reaction to that question is, like, I do think, like, learning and taking those missteps were valuable. It contributed to the person I am today. So I would do it all over again if I could. So there's not, besides maybe buy NVIDIA or some crazy stock that would have made me a bunch of money.
Don't we all wish we did that?
Yes. Outside of any Back to the Future little secrets to give me a financial gain, I don't think I would tell myself too much.
Oh, I love that.
No.
Yeah, that's such a great answer. That's such an honest answer. And I do agree that so much of your own path is what has made you who you are today. And so you do have to be grateful. So
Thank you, Lacey.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. Final advice question, which is less of advice and more going back to the fact that you are the podcast genie, master, aficionado. What podcast should everyone be listening to?
Should everyone be listening to? Mike Birbiglio's. Am I saying his last name right? Birbiglia. His show I find really, moving. Like, it's about comedy, but it's about far more about, like, life and purpose. Up until November, when I was at Condé, I worked on a lot of news podcasts, and I consumed at that time and still do a lot of news that I just like to know what's going on in the world. I still get a paper copy of the New York Times delivered on the weekends. That I'm just like watching the news, but working in news leading up to the election cycle or the election year, it was exhausting.
I can imagine.
And especially being interested in it, and it impacted my day job. So I just felt like I was surrounded by it 24/7, and literally, like, 24/7, it was kind of a constant. So after the results happened, and I was not necessarily excited about the results. I took a step back and was like, I need to drastically tune down the news.
Yes.
So I've weeded out, and even I've just monitored my consumption on news. So I
did the exact same thing.
Yes, yeah. And even now, of, like, there'll be stories that pop up that are just like, this is really annoying to me, but it's not going to do anything to the situation if I pay attention. So I'm going to not pay attention to this. So if you would ask me 6 months ago, I would have listened to 8 news podcasts. And now I've tried to replace that with comedy shows. So yeah, Working It Out. There's one, So True with Caleb Herring. He's like a Gen Z comedian. He's really funny. And then the one, this is news adjacent. I love Pivot with Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher. Yeah, that's like a business tech news talk show. And then the one, Apple's podcast of the year last year was called Hysterical. And that is an excellent show. I loved it. I binged it, like, in December, and I may re-listen to it, but it's the show I've been telling everyone to listen to. And then, yeah, I love The Daily, which is the one news one I'll say. So.
Yeah.
No.
I'm Michael Barbaro. Yes. No, absolutely. Those are some great suggestions. I'm going to honestly note most of those down and have to take a listen.
Yeah, please.
Well, thank you so much for spending the time with me today. I so appreciate it. I just have one more question for you.
Fire away, Lacey.
And that is, for you, what's next?
I've been like a big grand planner and like schemer. I'm a big schemer my whole life. And as I was ending last year, I intentionally didn't try to make any grand plans for this year of like, I want to continue to get enough work that I'm able to sustain my life in New York City. And at some point in this year, I would like to have a full-time job with benefits. So that is like a hopefully, like I applied to a job today that I'm excited about. So maybe something like I'm not quite sure what's next, I guess, is my answer. And I am allowing myself to be okay with that uncertainty.
Yeah, I feel like that is also a fabulous answer. And I think that is also something that people should be aware of and should be okay with, that you don't always have things figured out, and that is okay. And sometimes, fate intervenes and life will do its thing. So I love that. Well, again, thank you so much. I so appreciate it. I've learned so much from you, and I've so enjoyed learning your story. And I'm so excited to see all your work from your own podcast. And I'm excited to listen to all these podcasts you suggested.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Lacey. Thanks for inviting me on. I had a blast.
Good. I'm so glad.